with that group, you saw they were like brothers and sisters to me. I mean, I learned a lot. They helped my maturity in my position. You know, all of them played some role in influencing me in a way. And I really felt bonded with them. I felt honored to serve with them. Like I said about the gentleman named Pete Truman, who he served with my uncle as a police officer in West Philadelphia. And, you know, I learned a lot from him. He's older than me, but I learned a lot. I tended to be the youngest one in that particular, like I said, I was like 25 years old. And, you know, I was very young, never being in public office before, only the first time that I ever was in public office. And to be in public office and to be, think about it, Pennsylvania was like the fifth largest state. You know, Pennsylvania, big state. You know, you had California, New York, Texas, Florida. Pennsylvania was a huge state, one of the original 13 colonies. So, you know, to be in a position in Pennsylvania was significant when I went to Washington because of the presence of Pennsylvania and what Pennsylvania means. So I was very proud that, and as a result, those individuals on the Black Caucus helped affect me. And I kind of build on the shoulders of things I learned a lot from all of those individuals, each and every one of them.
K. Leroy Orvis, a giant of a man, a true Renaissance man, intellectual, one of the last orators of the House of Representatives, one of the greats, who could literally change a vote based on his floor speeches. Mm-hmm. And so there's a difference between an orator and a speech maker. Okay, an orator changes people's minds. Yes. A speech maker talks a lot. Mm-hmm. Okay, right. So Mr. Irvis was an orator. All right, he could change a vote. Served with him as a speaker and tried to pick up as much wisdom as I could in that one term, that 87, 88 period. And I wish I could have had more time with him. I wish I could have sat with him longer to get a better feel and really learn from him. But I served with him. And so understanding his brilliance and understanding the kind of change that he made across the legislative landscape, that gave me a sense of the possibility. It gave me a sense of the possible, what could be achieved, what could be done. You can, if you stick with this, you can really get somewhere.
The inspiration that K. Leroy Irvis really set for me. Like I said, I'm a fan of social studies, civics, and history. And as I, did history, I just learned about the amazing things that K. Leroy Irvis did and the things that he spoke out on, or the approach that he took in the House, and the respect that he had. And it's just something that really inspired me. And it's a way that I kind of want to move myself and govern that way. Somebody that considered themselves not a politician, but a statesman. And that's something that I strive to be and want to be, is to be a statesman, not necessarily a politician, but somebody that can listen to every person in the district and be able to hear them and represent them.
As I continue to grow, and by this time I'm in middle school and then heading towards high school, but there was a guy named David P. Richardson Jr., and everybody talked about this guy, David P. Richardson Jr., and David P. Richardson Jr. was going to run for the state rep seat, but he wasn't running as a Democrat, he's running as an independent. And again, this is jargon as a young kid. You don't know. You just know that he's running for office, and you see the statue of a man. He's like 6'3", had a baritone voice, but he was friendly. So it was like a Paul Bunyan type guy. The guy was big as life, but yet as gentle, like the gentle giant. And Dave was the kind of guy who would just walk through neighborhoods, talk to the kids. Hey guys, what you guys doing? And then talk about what we're doing. And again, this was during the time of when Philadelphia was dealing with, sometimes they called it gang war or just, territorial boundaries. But Dave was the kind of guy that walked in every area of Philadelphia and really truly beyond, as we got to know much more about Dave. But Dave was a guy that I looked up to. And I remember graduating from high school, and Dave was the state rep, and we were just proud because Dave went to the same high school that I went to. So we're very proud of that.
I would certainly say that people who were before me played a mentor role. My dad,
Of course.
I knew Senator McKinney, but not necessarily in a political way. I just knew him and respected him, but I necessarily involved myself in his political organization. But my dad obviously imprinted upon my entire life. So politics was no different. Values and character and structure, fighting for people who were in office, who we fought for, why we fought, are all part of the legacy of my dad, who gave me information about that and broadened my understanding, and certainly taught me the skills of how to get elected. And to a degree, I've been fortunate enough to help another generation behind me. Councilman Kenyatta Johnson, who used to be a former state representative, Councilman Jordan Harris, and Whip, and leader of the House, Jordan McClinton, Regina Young, who's a newly elected state rep, Rudy Taylor, who's a council member in Darby, are all people I've been fortunate enough to help. A few folks who've made it to the bench, Tamika Lane in particular, also worked for me, who's a judge now. So I've been fortunate enough to help other people pursue helping our communities from a position of elected office.
One thing about Alfonso Deal, he was real sharp with the Robert Rules of Order. So he knew that real good. And so he would argue those down in the FOP meetings and on the House floor. He was good at that. And he was just a leader, exemplar in terms of his activity and a champion, because he was active as an official in the NAACP too. He headed the Philadelphia chapter at one point.
So moving then into the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus, what was your involvement when you started in the House and even into your current Senate tenure?
Well, obviously was a member of the Black Caucus, chaired the Black Caucus from, I think, 1991 to 1994. Tried to do some groundbreaking things at that time. We convened the alternative budget, the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus alternative budget, for what the governor put out to make sure that our priorities, the priorities obviously for African American constituents across Pennsylvania, and for all constituents, but especially for African American constituents across Pennsylvania, were being addressed, were being heard. The Legislative Black Caucus had never done that. We got that idea from the Congressional Black Caucus in Washington, D.C., and they used to produce an annual alternative budget to address their priorities. So we just took that platform and we moved it down to the legislature. We convened one of the first gathering of Black elected officials from all across Pennsylvania. I think there were probably about 100 or so Black elected officials that showed up at a 3-day conference that we convened in one of the hotels by the airport in Philadelphia, by Philadelphia International Airport. And so those were good days. It was hard-working days. It was a learning experience for me. Let me backtrack. All of the days are hard-working days. It was a learning experience having that leadership responsibility at that time, because as much as you had your own ideas, you wanted to make sure that you were taking into consideration everyone else's viewpoint. And the ability to coalesce folks, which you on issues that you would normally think would be automatic, but not always automatic. And issues in southeastern Pennsylvania versus issues in western Pennsylvania or other portions of the state. not always the same. Not always the same. Understood that African American individuals across Pennsylvania who may not have had a black legislator or a black senator representing them thought in their mind that they had nowhere else to go, so they would come to the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus. And it would be our responsibility to give them an ear, to listen to them, to advocate for them and try to move their issue, because they came to us invariably because they felt that they could not get an ear with their own elected official. And that's kind of one of the unspoken responsibilities of the Legislative Black Caucus.
Beyond just being a member for my first 2 terms, my 3rd term I chaired the caucus. And the truth is, the Black Caucus chairmanship and the unity that we were able to create in that caucus helped catapult me to being able to put the votes together to run for leadership.
Okay.
Because coming out of the caucus, I knew I had a certain amount of votes that were not just in Philly, but across the state.
Mm-hmm.
So, that was extremely important. In addition, we were able to get a lot of stuff done when I was chairman. We created the Gun Violence Reduction Initiative, which is a grant that goes out every year. We did that with Governor Wolf. We got him to call gun violence a public health crisis. We got to put together some subcommittees that were able to do some good work. I created the Women and Girls of Color subcommittee, and I made Morgan Cephas the chair of that subcommittee. And so when you hear about dignity for incarcerated women, maternity, mortality, all of these things that are being talked about now, that work came from Morgan when she was the chair of the subcommittee of Women and Girls of Color. So we created the environment to have those kind of conversations.
As secretary, I need to know that when freshmen are coming in, what is their area? What are their issues? What are their concerns? Why did they run? Who are they? And just be more welcoming. And so I took it upon myself to do during the summertime when we were out of session. I went and visited the districts of the then incoming freshmen. And again, eye-opening to know that, what their districts look like. You hear about certain things that are happening in Philadelphia. And it turns out that the freshmen were from Philadelphia, Reading. I think that was it, just Philadelphia and Reading. And so I went to Reading with Rep. Guzman. That was eye-opening as many times as I've been to Reading. He showed me places and parts that I didn't even know existed that have been there for many, many years. And his gems and yet his challenges, right? And the same thing for Reps. Parker and Young, and all of the other freshmen that I went to see. And I just had just an experience that was more, it made me feel more part of the Black Caucus. It made me feel like I actually had purpose as a secretary.
You're the first Asian American to represent the first Senate district in Pennsylvania. So what has that meant to you personally or to the district as a whole? Both.
I would say to me personally, it's not an experience I think about on a daily basis, and I probably should, but actually it occurs to me more when other Asian Americans, mention it to me, when they experience a kind of moment of recognition. And that moment is I guess I would say intersubjective, to use like some philosophical jargon, but I would just like that I suddenly experienced that recognition myself then when I speak to other Asian Americans, where they're like, oh, you're the only Asian American in the Senate, or you're one of the few, and one of two in the legislature, or what have you. And I'm like, you're right, that's the experience. And like, what do we do with it? What do we make out of it? How do we make that meaningful? It's so that I would say has been has been the primary experience?
So I really want to give credit to former Representative Ron Waters of Philadelphia. We had bumped into each other at several events, rallies before I became state rep. We built a relationship when I won. We were discussing ways for me to get involved. And he, as chair of the Black Caucus then, changed the bylaws so that it was not just African-American members of the House, and I guess the Senate as well, but just people of color. So he brought in the bylaws so that I would be able to join them. So I was so appreciative, and that's what I meant by open arms. And
the leadership that we have had in the past were many of many words. And when Joanna came in, she goes, this is going to be a priority because you are a member just like everybody else, and you're entitled to have your wishes. And it happened. It happened. So we're here today because of her using her power, her influences to get this done.
And what 5 or 4 members, you said 5, what members make up that group?
It's myself, Danilo Burgos from Philadelphia, Ben Sanchez from Montgomery County, Liz Hambridge, and Manny Guzman from Reading.
So there is, I think the reigning value, and I don't know that this would be set down, written anywhere, but I'd say that the defining value for Filipino Americans is an openness and a welcoming to other kinds of people. That's just a universal trait of Filipinos. There will be exceptions, but I think when people visit the Philippines, what they find out is that not only are you welcomed with open arms, but no matter who you are welcome. So there isn't this wall of immediate rejection or prejudice. You find it's just an openness, and an outgrowth of that is a signature trait of hospitality that I really viewed. I thought one of the roles a lieutenant governor could play in terms of building bridges between people with diverse opinions is thinking about how you could utilize the Senate dining room or other pieces of real estate for relationship building and hospitality. I think those would be incredibly important.
You mentioned your district, the 200th, which is portions of Philadelphia County and City. Very historic district. You mentioned a few of your predecessors. Could you elaborate more on what it's like being in such a well-known district in terms of its membership?
Sure. Well, originally my district, the neighborhoods that my district has covered have been predominantly white and with a strong Jewish enclave that as a result of white flight into the suburbs and migration of Black communities from North Philly and other parts became a predominantly Black area for the past 30 years. So my earliest kind of predecessors in the modern era, really since the 50s and 60s, they were Jewish. And then John White Jr. was the first African-American legislator to represent this district. Since then, and after he left, all of my predecessors have been Black women. So there is no glass ceiling in the 200th.
In the Senate, what has been your experience being a person of color in the Senate? Have you had any challenges in running for public office, or when you were here in the Senate working on legislation or committee work or anything along those lines?
I would say in the context of my campaign, we want to start off with the campaign, it was a tremendous advantage to being African American. A lot of the district was African American, and so there was a lot of support, I think, of me because I had some level of affinity. I have a really high level of education. I think that helped with the other parts of the district. So I would say being African American was a big asset for my run for state Senate. I would say now in the state Senate, I would not say I've encountered any kind of discrimination based upon race. The Senate is a very competitive environment where each senator is trying to get as much resources for their district as they can. So I wouldn't say I've experienced any kind of overt. I would say that the stereotype I have encountered, which is the common American stereotype that African Americans don't want law enforcement, heavy law enforcement. I remember one committee meeting where one of the senators said, okay, yeah, I know where you're coming from. And he had an assumption that I wasn't interested in strong law enforcement, which is completely wrong. I believe in public safety and law enforcement. So I don't know if that, so I did get a sense that was a racial stereotype. There's probably been other racial stereotypes that I haven't experienced, although if I haven't experienced it, it's really hard to talk about it. So that would be the one that I can really recall. The other one I think, which is also significant, is the stereotype that I am from Philadelphia, and my district includes Montgomery County. I live in Montgomery County. I lived in Montgomery County over 20 years. Now, there's nothing wrong with being from Philadelphia, but every Black person who's an elected official is not from Philadelphia. So that stereotype I have, it's interesting that President Pro Tem always introduces me as the gentleman from Philadelphia, which obviously is not the case because I live in Montgomery County. But I'm not, I'm very proud of the folks in Philadelphia. I used to live in Philadelphia, but I do think that is a stereotype of, I have I have an urban agenda, and have a harder time seeing suburban experience or other parts of the state. So I think that's probably a racial stereotype that I'm not as sure what the impact of it is, but I think it's present.
Well, I think that for those who want to understand why it was historic, because of what happened out of that district. It was the first district in Philadelphia, probably in the state, where an African American was elected to office without the party endorsement, quote unquote, against the system. So this district was literally the touch point for African Americans and people who were interested in changing the system. And that was the party machinery would select who was to represent you. Didn't matter what the district looked like. It was just the party machinery picked the person. And so that's the nature of the history behind this district, that it literally created the independent political movement, not just for Black people, for all folks, because it became a standard and organizing mechanism. How do you do it? All those things came out of this district, and it led to other people of color across Philadelphia being elected to office in a similar fashion.
What I can appreciate is that I do think that our leadership, at least in the Democratic caucus, sees the Black caucus as a key constituency to the larger caucus, to the larger Democratic caucus, right? They understand that the caucus and my leadership, the Black caucus and my leadership needs to be at the table every time. And I try to stress this year and the last year that the Black caucus isn't just about criminal justice reform and police brutality. We want to be at the table for all of the decisions. We want to be there when you're talking about transportation. We want to be there when you're talking about agriculture. We want to be there when you're talking about, energy and environmental issues. Because in each of those spaces, I can show you where and how Black and brown folks have been impacted and may have a opinion about how to move the Commonwealth forward, or can play a role in moving the Commonwealth forward. And so I think that's the great part is that in the last year, I do believe that our leadership has said the Black Caucus needs to be at the table, and has made sure that we are at all the tables in some way.
Okay.
And even better, this is the first time in our history we've got these great leaders in our caucus that are leading the caucus, right?
Yeah.
Right? We had last term anyway, we had 3 Black leaders in the Democratic caucus. You had Rosita Youngblood, Joanna McClinton, and Jordan Harris. It's amazing. And then this year we continue that leadership with Jordan Harris and Joanna McClinton. So seeing Black leadership not just in the Black caucus, but in all of the other spaces of leadership in the Capitol. So we are, yes, leading the Democratic caucus, but we're also leading the Philadelphia delegation. We are leading the Allegheny delegation with Austin Davis. We were leading the Southeast delegation with Margot Davison before she left. And so we were in every space, Women's Health Caucus with Morgan Cephas. So we were in not just regulated to just quote unquote the Black issues. We were being seen in all of those spaces as leaders. And I think that is, if anything, is a big achievement. And the next, that we're not just limited to K. Leroy Irvis's great leadership, but that we are seeing leaders throughout rank and file and all the way, through the entire spectrum of leadership in this building.
And you're the first African American woman to represent your district, but also the first woman and African American woman to represent, be the leader for the Democrats. So what is that experience like? Do you have any thoughts about that you'd like to share?
So it has been a truly humbling opportunity for my colleagues to decide to choose that a woman should be in charge in the House, and that I'm so grateful that they've decided to allow me to do it for this term. And in terms of thoughts, it's just an exciting challenge. It's an amazing opportunity. My goal every time I step on the floor of the House is to uplift their voices and their issues, to amplify their issues, to make sure that even with us being in a minority party, that their issues are uplifted, and that when I speak, I recognize now I don't just get to speak for my neighbors, but I get to speak for my colleagues. And it's just really an exciting journey. And what makes me most excited is that very soon it won't be, a first woman to do this or a first woman to do that. Like, it will be a normal thing in Harrisburg.
Yes. I was going to ask you, do you think this will open up more doors for more women and more people with diverse backgrounds to take on leadership roles?
For sure, because when I ran the first time for a leadership spot, it was for caucus chair. Okay. And caucus is can be a bit rowdy. And, some of the members were saying, how are you going to keep order? How are you going to maintain? And I just told them, you've never had a woman try to keep order. But you will see that women are gifted with a special knack to be able to keep everybody calm and everybody in order and respecting each other. Yes. And I never was thinking I'm jumping from chair to leader. Of course, my predecessor here did not make it out of the last election. So the same thought I had as caucus chair, my whole goal was, if I'm going to be in a room with a gavel with a room full of men, I'm going to show them a woman can run this room. And now, as a woman running this caucus, it's important that the women who are here now and the women who will come after all of us will be able to do this job. They will not be foreclosed for anybody else, because they'll be able to say, oh, we trusted this woman to do it, and she did a great job.
Running for public office, we're representing the community that, in my particular case, I grew up in the community I have the honor of representing. But once you make it to the House, you do have to work. Being a person of color and Latino, we do have to work twice as hard just to be recognized and to have the voice of our community recognized. Unfortunately, even in today, 2022, the way that some communities are viewed are not in a favorable way or an equal way as our Constitution implies. We still have some social, economic based issues that affect, in particular, a community like mine, the 197th Legislative District. we still have underfunded schools, the need of jobs, good paying jobs, and I mean, just the simple fact of properly funding schools, the inequity in school districts across the Commonwealth. And it just so happens that the ones that receive the least funding are the school districts that are primarily people of color and communities of immigrants, which it shouldn't have to be like, it shouldn't be like that, but unfortunately it is.
There are definitely times where you can feel alienated or feel like you're not part of the like dominant culture. Also being, you know, in the minority party, right? Being a minority in the minority party. But I am very grateful, right, that there are other Black legislators, whether it's other freshmen or other, you know, recently elected members or even some more senior members, you know, like the chair of the Black Caucus, chair of the Philly delegation, and the folks in leadership who have been very welcoming to me as a person of color, that have created spaces for legislators of color to be able to like talk and connect and share, right, like their vision, their challenges. So being able to have those kind of spaces, even in the face of all of these kind of like structural realities, has been good and has been a good source of support.
Okay. Being a person of color, and especially of a woman, you're in the minority. There aren't as many women of color or women elected officials, and not just in Pennsylvania, but in general. So it's a very different transition to get used to on a daily basis. That's why, again, I have very fortunate and blessed that I maintained the relationship with Representative Youngblood, that I am her neighbor. I also keep in touch with former Senator Kitchen. I also keep in touch with former Senator Leanna Washington. I also keep in touch with the Honorable Curtis Thomas. I also keep in touch. He's now our Congressman, Dwight Evans. So if you can see where my upline is going as it relates to legislation, I pretty much have individuals who are currently in the government branch, but then I have individuals who have been retired and can pave the way to where I am today. And literally why all of them are always receptive to me, because this is how I always have been when it came to them.
Being a Black woman, educated Black woman, a confident Black woman, we always have to work harder. So I don't think there's a singular lane in which I have to work more hard, I would say. I'm always working hard. My very existence is a political statement in any room I walk in, and I'm very conscious of that. So I enter any situation with that mindset. I'm Black anyway, right? And so I think whether you are actively a part of a group or not, people are always going to associate you with Black issues. We are a diaspora of people, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to at least have a lane to sit in as people are already identifying me with Black issues.
It was really, you know, my experience coming into the Senate was principally that there is a kind of latitude given, I would say, it's a very white institution, heavily male institution. And there are only 4 members of color besides myself in the institution, and I hope that will change. There are many more, even though proportionally, I don't know if it accounts for much more in the House. But I would just say that there is a kind of latitude given to white members of the organization, and a presumption that they, you know, that is not necessarily given to the members of color. It's hard to say. It's hard to point to examples of that. It's hard to point to experiences that you know clearly point to it. But you know, I think there's just this. There isn't a wide knowledge of. It's more like there isn't a wide knowledge of the diversity in the Commonwealth. There isn't a wide knowledge, not just of the diversity purely in terms of color, but in terms of national origin, language background, religion, all of which tend to correlate to being a person of color, but aren't exclusive?
I felt supported.
Okay.
By the Black Caucus. I really did. Representative Steve Kinsey and Donna Johnson Bullock, they made me feel supported.
Have we been treated differently? Yes. You know, people of color have been treated the way Republicans treat Democrats and Democrats treat Republicans. You know, if you're not of that party, you know, you're not of great importance. And I've always I have told both sides of the aisle, I want you to get to learn my world so I can learn yours. And that's the way we can identify what the needs are. Because at the time that I was here, I was the lone Latino legislator. So I didn't only represent Philadelphia where I was elected, I did the whole Commonwealth because there was no other voice but me.
It's a space for Black women. We definitely have different challenges when it comes to different issues that concern the Black community, and especially with women. So we can talk about Roe v. Wade right now. It is a different space for the Black community and Black women. And so as one of a few Black female legislators, it's a space that feels different and a little harder because as Black legislators and as Black women legislators, we have to look at things differently. Talking about maternal mortality, I've had to fight pretty hard right here in my district around a hospital closures and maternal deserts, fighting for an organization right now that I think is being shafted around doula services here in a Black-owned organization right here in the 164th. You know, when you see injustices in spaces that you feel like are happening to folks because of color or because of race, it does put us in different spaces as Black legislators. So I just want to give a shout out to, again, to Chairwoman Bullock and Executive Director April Ash and everybody who serves on that executive team for putting wonderful policy hearings together, wonderful spaces where as Black legislators we can come together and see what's really going on in a lot of our communities. And as a whole, the camaraderie with the entire caucus has been great. I have been completely welcomed into a space where, again, it was not the easiest transition because a member had to leave and someone new came in. And that's always a space where you're looking like, how is this going to work out? Are people going to be accepting? But my caucus has been wonderful in helping me to learn.
Do you think that the General Assembly will become more diverse in future terms with the great relationships the Black Caucus is providing within the General Assembly? Do you think it'll become more diverse in the future?
Absolutely, 100%. I just think about, and I think it's multifaceted, right? So it's not just what can the General Assembly do to sort of incentivize a more diverse group of folks who may run for office, but I think it's, and we are doing that. You even look at what has happened with redistricting and the way that is laid out this year, that it looks like it's going to be more reflective of the Commonwealth, more reflective of the population, where you have more opportunities for Black and brown folks and folks of color and women to be more incentivized to run. I think on the political side of things, there are always going to be challenges.
I just think it's important for us to recognize the importance of our presence, and it's important for everyone else to know that we're here on purpose and our presence matter. And I think the more we come together to align our voices and our vision and our work, I think whether people want to or not, they're gonna see us.
I think it's extremely important that there be a legislative Black caucus. At the same time, we are entering into a part of American history where the majority of Americans are going to be Black and brown. And so I think it's going to be increasingly important that there be a caucus that can include the agendas of African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, so that those diverse agendas can be included and incorporated. I do not think that Black Caucus of 2030, and so if we get to 2030 and we have a Black caucus or a caucus that does not include Hispanic Americans, I think that'd be a tremendous mistake. If we don't have a caucus that includes Asian Americans, I think that'd be a tremendous mistake. And when I say include them, I mean include their agendas, not just their bodies.
Do you see more Asian Americans running for the House, or hopefully seeing people like you and other representatives seeing more representation? Do you think more will start running for office?
Short answer, yes, but I think it's going to take a while.
Okay.
As I get out more, and thanks to Zoom, I'm able to reach Asian American groups across the state. And just seeing me as a possibility, as an option to be a leader is going to sink in, and hopefully will come to fruition later down the line, down the road.